Okay, imagine this. You build this amazing deep-sea robot, right? And its job is super specific. Just map the ocean floor, ignore the fish, ignore the currents, just map the rocks and trenches.
Right, focus on the geography.
Exactly. But then you get the data back, and you realize your map doesn't just show the seafloor. It perfectly shows where all the different fish hang out, like their density, even though you told it not to look at fish.
That's a great analogy for what we're diving into today.
It really is.
Yeah.
Because that's the big surprise shaking up self-supervised learning right now. These systems, JEPAs, joint embedding predictive architectures, they were designed specifically not to generate data, not to model the fish, so to speak. But it turns out they've been secretly learning the underlying distribution, the density of their entire training data set all along.
It's a fundamental shift in understanding. We're looking at this paper, Gaussian Embeddings, how JEPAs secretly learn your data density. And it really digs into how.
Yeah, we're going to unpack the theory, the geometry behind it, and this tool they came up with called JEPA score for actually extracting that hidden map.
And it's fascinating because models like iJEPA, DynoV2, they were praised for being efficient precisely because they weren't generative. They just learned representations.
Skipping the hard part, we thought.
But this research basically says, well, nope. To do their job properly, they have to estimate that underlying data density, the PXESC anyway, it's baked into the process.
So our mission today, figure out how this hidden estimation works, and more importantly, why pulling out this secret knowledge is actually a huge deal for practical things, like checking data quality or spotting weird outliers.
Absolutely. It's got real implications.
Okay, let's unpack this.
So maybe we start with the basics. What is a JEPA actually trying to do?
Good idea. Because understanding their goals is key to seeing how they accidentally became density estimators. That's kind of two main jobs, right? Two core objectives during training.
That's right. The first one is all about prediction, sometimes called predictive invariance. The idea is the model learns features that are stable.
Stable how?
Well, if you take an input, say an image, and you block out a small piece of it mask, the model should still be able to predict the representation, the features of that missing piece just by looking at the features of the rest of the image.
Oh, okay. So it learns the context, the structure. Yeah. Makes the features robust even if parts are missing.
Exactly. That's pillar one. Now, pillar two, this is where things get really interesting for density. It's the anti-collapse term, or sometimes called representation diversity.
Anti-collapse sounds defensive.
It is. Without it, the model could cheat. It could just learn to map every single input, no matter how different, to the exact same point in the feature space.
Total collapse. Useless representation.
Completely useless. So this term forces the representations to spread out, to stay distinct, to actually represent the variety in the data.
Okay, prediction and diversity. And you're saying that second one, keeping things diverse, is the secret sauce for density estimation. How does that lead to the Gaussian goal the paper talks about?
Well, the way many JEPAs enforce this diversity is by encouraging the final representations, these Gaussian embeddings, to conform to a very specific shape, a Gaussian distribution.
Like a bell curve, but in high dimensions.
Sort of, yeah. But why Gaussian? It's mathematically special. A Gaussian distribution has the maximum possible differential entropy for a given variance.
Entropy, like randomness,
Mm-hmm.
or information.
Information content, really. Maximum entropy means the representations are spread out as much as possible, encoding as much information as possible about the input, given that constraint. It's the most unbiased or uniform high-dimensional distribution you can get under that variance lid.
Okay, so maximizing information, does that mean the GPA has to, pay really close attention to how the original data is laid out, its statistics?
Precisely. To spread things out effectively into this target Gaussian shape, the model can't just ignore the input distribution PXs. It has to know which inputs are common, which are where the clusters are. That diversity objective implicitly forces it to learn the input statistics.
Wow.
What's fascinating here is this anti-collapse term, it was just meant to stop the model from being lazy, right?
Yeah, a technical fix.
But it turns out it's the very mechanism that forces the model to learn the density. They built a bug fix that became, well, an intelligence gathering tool.
So the thing they explicitly tried not to build, a generative density model, is actually mathematically required by the thing they did build. That's the core insight.
That's the core theoretical link they've uncovered, yes.
Okay, so how does it bridge that gap? You've got this messy, complex, real-world data distribution. PSXLR, and you want to map it to this perfect, orderly, high-dimensional Gaussian thing. How does the network actually do that transformation?
It comes down to geometry, specifically high-dimensional geometry. This is where Lemma 1 in the paper comes in. In very high dimensions, something weird happens with Gaussians.
Oh, wait.
If you take a standard Gaussian and normalize the vectors, they don't really look like a cloud anymore. They become almost perfectly uniformly distributed just on the surface of a high-dimensional sphere, a hypersphere.
Wow. Okay, so the target isn't just Gaussian-ish. It's uniform on a sphere.
Effectively, yes, in high dimensions. Now, Lemma 2 says, for the network, for the function $5, to transform your arbitrary input density PADIAC into this beautifully simple uniform density on the hypersphere, it must implicitly learn PFX. There's no way around it.
It has to know the starting map to create the ending map.
Exactly. It needs to know how common or rare each input point is to know how to place it correctly on that sphere.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
You said it has to learn it. How does the model actually perform that calculation? What's the mechanism inside the network?
It all hinges on the network's Jacobian matrix at each input point series.
The Jacobian.
Yeah.
Refresh my memory slightly. That relates changes in input to changes in output, right? Derivatives.
Essentially, yes. Think of it like this. The Jacobian J tells you how the space around the input point $6 gets stretched, squeezed, or rotated when the network maps it into the embedding space. It's the local transformation rule.
Like a piece of rubber sheet being deformed.
That's a perfect way to think about it. Now, imagine you have a region in your input space where data points are really common high density in PXE.
Okay. Like lots of pictures of flying birds.
Right. To make the final distribution uniform on the hypersphere, the network must use the Jacobian to contract, to squeeze that high-density region when it maps it. Otherwise, you'd get a big clump on the sphere, ruining the uniformity.
So high-density input means high compression by the Jacobian.
Exactly right. And the opposite is true, too. If you have a very rare input sample, low-density PXE, maybe a bird sitting down the Jacobian must expand that region significantly when mapping it.
To spread those rare points out so they still cover the sphere uniformly.
Precisely. This change of variables, mathematically, requires the determinant of the Jacobian, or related singular values, to directly counteract the input density PXLers. The model has to perform this crucial calculation, this density-aware stretching and squeezing, for every single point to achieve its goal. It internalizes the density.
So the model built this detailed density map just trying to keep its embeddings diverse and Gaussian-like. The info is right there encoded in how much it stretches or squeezes space via the Jacobian.
Locked inside, yes.
Wait, practical step. The map exists. How do we, download it? We need an efficient way to get this density information out without running some huge generative process.
And it's exactly what JEPA score is designed for. It's the tool they developed, proven by their Theorem 1, to efficiently extract this implicitly learned density score directly from a trained JEPA.
Efficient how? What does it actually calculate using the Jacobian?
It cleverly uses the singular values of the Jacobian matrix. The singular values are the precise mathematical measures of that stretching and squeezing along different directions at point $6.
Okay. JEPA score is essentially calculated, usually in log scale for stability, as the sum of the logarithms of these singular values. It's efficient because calculating the Jacobian and its singular values, well, that leverages standard automatic differentiation tools already used to train the network. No extra training needed. So you just run a sample through the trained model, calculate the Jacobian of the embedding function at that point, find its singular values, sum their logs, and boom, you have the density score.
Pretty much. That's the core idea. It's a closed-form calculation based on the existing model components.
Which makes the interpretation super clean. If an input causes the Jacobian to compress space a large singular values, it gets a high JEPA score.
Meaning it's a high probability sample, very typical of the training data.
And if the input requires expansion or just less compression of small singular values, it gets a low JEPA score.
Meaning it's a low probability sample, an outlier potentially.
Did they prove this score actually matches the true density?
They did some compelling experiments. Because JEPA score approximates the true log density gradient, the score function, they showed you could use techniques like Langevin sampling, which follows density gradients, to actually generate samples that look like the original training data.
Whoa, so using the JEPA score, they could kind of reverse engineer the data generation process, proving the density information was really there.
Exactly. It confirms the score isn't just some arbitrary number. It genuinely reflects the learned distribution PX of Ehlers. That was a key proof of concept.
And critically, this wasn't just a one-off fluke with one specific model architecture, right? They tested it more broadly.
Yes, that's important. They validated it across several key models in the JEPA family, iJEPA, DynoV2, and even Metaclip, which handles both images and text. The underlying principle holds as long as the architecture uses that JEPA-style predictive objective with an anti-collapse mechanism pushing towards Gaussian embeddings.
Okay, let's ground this in the real world. The paper had some striking examples, especially on data curating, using JEPA score to understand dataset biases in something like ImageNet.
Right, ImageNet is massive, but it's known to have biases. They looked at bird classes, for instance. Class 21, birds of prey, and Class 141, redshanks. What kind of images got a high JEPA score?
The ones the model considered normal or high probability,
Those were consistently images of birds in flight, actively flying.
but then the low score images for the exact same bird classes.
Those showed the birds seated, resting on a branch on the ground. Still clearly birds of that class, but depicted in a way the model implicitly learned was less common in the training data.
That's incredible. It gives you such a clear window into what the model actually learned was the typical view of a bird. Not just feathers and beak, but specifically a bird flying.
It's a powerful, non-parametric way to audit your dataset's biases. You see immediately what the model considers core or peripheral, common or rare, without needing labels or manual inspection of millions of images. JEPA score surfaces it.
And that leads directly into the outlier detection results too, right? If it knows what's normal for its training data.
It should also know what's abnormal.
How do they test that?
They took JEPAs trained on ImageNet, a dataset of natural images, and fed them completely different kinds of images, like MNIST handwritten digits or pictures of galaxies.
Things it definitely never saw during training.
Exactly. And predictably, those out-of-distribution samples scored much lower on the JEPA score scale compared to typical ImageNet samples. The model essentially flagged them as highly unlikely given its training experience.
It recognized they didn't fit the learned intelligence.
Precisely. And what's more, they showed that as the pre-training dataset got bigger, comparing an iJEPA trained on ImageNet 1K versus one trained on the full ImageNet 22K, the scores for those outliers got even lower.
So more data means it gets better at defining the boundaries of its knowledge. Sharper detection of what's outside.
Seems so. A better trained model has a tighter, more accurate estimate of its own data density, PXCX, making deviations stand out more clearly.
Okay. If we connect this to the bigger picture, what we have now is this surprisingly powerful, efficient method built right into existing models. We don't need a separate generative model just to assess data likelihood.
Exactly. You can take your off-the-shelf iJEPA or DynoV, calculate the score, and immediately get insights into data quality, identify potential outliers, check for domain shift before deployment. It's a very practical tool derived from this deep theoretical insight.
So wrapping this up, what does this all mean? This discovery kind of redraws the map of self-supervised learning, doesn't it?
It really does. It fundamentally connects these JEPA models, which we thought were purely about non-generative representation learning, directly to the world of score-based generative modeling. Two families we thought were separate.
And the bridge is that anti-collapse term, pushing towards Gaussian embeddings. That innocent-looking mechanism is secretly a density estimator.
That's the key takeaway. The drive for diverse, information-rich Gaussian embeddings mathematically forces the model to learn TPX11. And JEPA score, using the Jacobian singular values, gives us the key to unlock that knowledge efficiently.
So, better data governance, smarter outlier detection, all from understanding this hidden mechanism.
The huge practical wins.
It really makes you think. Since we now know these huge foundation models are implicitly learning data density down to the finest detail, even when they're just trying to predict missing patches or align representations, what does that imply? Could it be that any sufficiently large predictive model trained on enough real-world data is essentially already a latent generative model? Is the potential to generate data based on that learned score always lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for the right technique, like JEPA score, to bring it out?
Yeah, that's a very provocative thought. Are all these giant models secretly generative models in disguise?
Something for you, our listeners, to ponder. What else are these models learning that we haven't even thought to look for yet?